We are in the third week of PTR testing. They gave us the 3 returning Shadowlands dungeons this week, so Halls of Atonement, Tazavesh Gambit, and Tazavesh Streets. We also had full Mythic Raid testing for the first 7 bosses, and a very small amount of class tuning, which I will summarize. DPS DKs got massive buffs all around. Frost DK got a few ability damage buffs, and then an extra 10% aura buff on top of that, catapulting it from a good spec to a borderline broken spec. Unholy got a few buffs to its spenders to make up for the loss of Season 2 tier set, and some extra crit scaling tied to their mastery. Unholy seems to be doing quite good now on single target, but maybe a little lacking in M+. We saw some small nerfs to the tier sets for Havoc and Vengeance. The enhanced tier set got a small duration nerf, which didn't really affect their damage much. And Ellie tier set got a massive uptime nerf, going from 6 stacks to activate to 9, meaning they can go over a minute without proccing the ascendants from their tier. This nerf was kind of weird because I think Ellie was already not that great, definitely suffering on single target, and also it targeted the fun part of the tier instead of the boring 4-set bonus. And the fast tier set is also still sub 1% gain. We saw a change taking the Monk debuff Mystic Touch from 5% to 8%, which benefits physical classes for now, but has some potential to cause big problems and divisions between classes in the future. I put a video out on this a few days ago. And then a few days after the patch, we saw a post with some new rogue buffs to all 3 specs, bringing them from being terrible to being decent, and a few warlock buffs that were actually kind of nerfs as they came with a tier set nerf. Missing from this week is any real nerfs to the classes considered to be OP. Boomy saw no change to their one-shot tier set, and then Hunter and Mage actually got slight buffs. There were a few changes to other classes that didn't really affect anything. Here is a M+ tier list I made on stream. I'm not going to go into it too much, and note that it is somewhat subjective. I do think some classes in the lower tiers may be better than I have given them, but overall it's looking like the comp from last season is still the best, with a few extra classes scattered in like Hunter that will most likely get nerfed soon. I think all the specs I have on A are providing competitive overalls, while the specs on B are a bit below, and then I think the specs on C have some problems. Tank balance does look like it has some potential. There are 4 tanks that appear to have their own positives and negatives, and maybe it will end up a comp based thing. Looking at the dungeons, we have 3 beloved Shadowlands dungeons that are returning. Halls of Atonement they have made quite a bit harder, I would say. The gargoyles are no longer controllable, so you lose a lot of damage in the key, and also if you pull one you have to deal with its frontal and AoE damage plus interruptibility that it does. They made the hounds really scary for tanks, putting up a stacking bleed that can eventually just one-shot. The trolling groundskeepers now run away at full speed when they hit 50% health, so if they aren't stopped and slowed they will likely pull extra packs. The area between first and second boss has a lot of extra mobs, making it harder to skip through. And then the third boss was made way harder. They gave it a double dispel mechanic in addition to making the ghost pulse way higher damage, very scary. The mini boss after third boss now gives players a 30% damage amp, which makes it very easy for boomies to one-shot it. And the last boss has some more mechanics to dodge. In Tazavesh Streets, they changed the bosses up a bit. First boss has no rotating shield but now casts a frontal. The music room boss now puts up a massive absorb at 66 and 33%. You need to break the shield and kick the boss or everyone takes a massive hit of damage. On an 18 it's about 30 mil. Depending on your comp, it might be a strat to just let the shield go off with all defensives and hold your damage for the boss itself. The mailroom boss is now a scripted fight with a completely consistent order of abilities, although they removed the fun haste bubbles when you killed the male elementals. And the last boss now intermittently applies a bleed to 3 players. The Bazaar event is a lot different now. Instead of having random small ads constantly spawn, now there are 3 waves of ads that trigger when you pick up the items up to deliver. In Tazavesh Gambit, they changed up some mobs. The Merkbrine wave jumpers were straight up removed and not replaced with anything else, so there are less Murlocs now. But the fish stick Murlocs are a bit of a menace. They have a 4-second cast time fish stick that always recasts after it's stopped, meaning you have to chain CC on them over and over again. They made it easier to kill the fish sticks, but most classes just have a lot of abilities that do not hit totems. Like as a shaman, my Tempest does 0 damage to fish sticks even if I target them. So these packs are kinda chaotic, and if you play some fish stick packs one after another, you will probably end up running out of CC. The dragon boss is very hard now. They added a double dispel mechanic to this boss as well. It is a stacking dot that increases the player's haste while it is active. When it's dispelled, it explodes and does AoE damage, so you have to stagger the dispels and you can have your whole group just die if one of the targets is low when the other gets dispelled. Having to deal with this, as well as a massive amount of area denial and baiting required for the fire and the ads, as well as having to deal with the hook that almost one-shots you, makes this boss feel really difficult. And then in the third boss area, instead of the single guy that you can walk past at the entrance, they now have 2 of them, so you can only get through with stealth or mind soothe. Overall, Gambit feels kinda easy on the timer. Halls is kinda easy on the timer as well, but the actual mobs are hard and do high damage, while Streets is maybe a bit tighter. People are doing 17s and 18s on heroic gear with potential to go higher. Now this week they did full Mythic Raid testing of all bosses but the last. The Mythic mechanic on the first boss is there are 2 small adds every intermission that must be killed before the wall goes through them or they explode. These adds didn't have much health and could be gripped. On the second boss, there are 2 sequential Eranog walls and a pylon to soak in phase 1. This boss seems like a boss where you'll have to lust phase 2 and burn. The third boss felt really simple and maybe missing a mechanic. On Mythic, you have to aim 1 set of small orbs into a canister before you can break it with a line, but that's incredibly simple, and even if you fail the mechanic, the adds kinda just do nothing. This is like a single target boss with a massive ad wave at 2 minutes and 4 minutes 30. The fourth boss had a mechanic where you have to place orb baits behind a void pool, otherwise they would be immune to damage and go on to do a raid-wide nuke. And in the intermission, the pylons all had to be killed at the same time, making dot classes very good at this phase. The boss phases to phase 2 at 25%, but there are guilds that held DPS and phase at the same time as the damage amp with Lust, causing them to be done with the phase in 40 seconds. On the Demon Hunter 5th boss, entire raid gets gripped into melee and then must go out and soak 3 individual hunt soaks, where every player can only be in one. In the intermission, everyone has swamp face chains to 1 or 2 other players and that group must move together. If this boss is truly optional, I don't see many guilds doing this on Mythic in prog because it seems somewhat difficult. The Mythic mechanic on Fractalus, the 6th boss, was quite underwhelming. Some walls are white and when they are broken they give an extra dot. Was nothing really noteworthy. And the testing for the 7th boss, Nexus King, was extremely difficult. There were constant beams going through the raid very quickly that do 30 million damage a second, essentially one-shotting everyone that got hit. In addition, the tank frontals were bigger, and after soaking, everyone needed to face a white figure, otherwise they would gain an extra stack. Few guilds made it out of phase 1, but we saw some of the laser beams in phase 2, which look pretty cool, and I'm pretty sure if someone gets hit here, the entire raid dies. Overall, the raid testing was interesting, but the boss's health was way lower than it should have been, so some kill times looked really short. Obviously, they will be tuned harder in live. The class tuning is nothing really different from the last week. BM Hunter, MM Hunter, Frost DK, Shadow Priest, and Boomy are definitely looking like the strongest classes and most likely to get nerfed. Warriors, Enhanced, Rogues, and Windwalkers are looking very mid right now, and I think Ret and Ellie are probably the worst specs in raid at the moment. Healers are looking a bit more balanced than the other week, with Holy Priest, Mistweaver, and Prez seemingly dominating the logs. And for tanks, I assume the ones that are brought will just be for the buffs. I don't really know much about how they interact with fights at the moment. Something else that was discovered is there is now a champion track Delve Trinket vendor when you hit level 3 on the Delver's Bounty. Now, I will say this was a pretty uneventful week in terms of things getting changed. I assume it was kind of on purpose to get more data from raid testing and because there were holidays last week. I'm probably expecting some big changes next week. I'm predicting a nerf for some of these classes, a fix for the unintended interaction where the Boomy tier set cap scales off max HP, causing them to go bear form in their CDs for damage, and maybe a buff to some lower performing tier sets like the Farseer Elemental set, which apparently gives less than 1% DPS, while other classes have a tier set giving 40% like Shadow Priest.